What is communication? And we're going to give our best to answer that question. Now, we have to admit that defining communication in a way that everybody agrees with is almost impossible. Why? Well, one reason is the word common. In 1970, in the Journal of Communication, Frank Dance said that communication is one of the most overworked terms in the English language, and he wrote that a decade ago. But the situation is the same today. It is a word like culture or community. If you ask 100 different people what those words means, you'd get 100 different definitions, but we have to go to define it. I'm no quitter. So, here's what we're going to do. This video has 3 parts. First, I'll give you a basic definition. Next, we look at 3 popular models of communication. And finally, I'll touch on how different researchers study communication in different angles. Taken together, that will give you a well-rounded answer to this question. The word communication in Latin comes from word communicare, which means share, or to make something. And I love that my plain language basic working definition of communication from all I've read is the process by which people transmit information, share verbal and non-verbal messages, and create. So let's look the 3 models of communication that align with those 3 keywords: transmit, share, and create. Years ago, in 1948, Claude Shannon and Warren Weaver developed a fundamental models of communication that you'll see in the most textbooks. From their view, communication happens when an information source, a sender, has a message and transmit that message in the form of a signal through a channel. Let's say that the little box in the middle represents that channel. Then, that signal is received by the receiver and its final destination. Along the way, there might be some noise in the communication system that could negatively influence the process. Some people call this the container model because according to the model, meaning is to contain the words themselves. When the message has been reached its final destination, communication has been accomplished because the message has been sent and received. Now, I'd like to point out that the concept of feedback is not part of Shannon's and Weaver's original model. Even some textbooks add that. The word feedback does not appear in the diagram and nowhere in the textbook of the original article. That concept came later. Shannon and Weaver were diagramming and were interested in communication systems like the telegraph, the telephone, and radio. And their model reflects that 1948 way of looking at communication, so it's linear. One-way model that describes how information is transmitted. Their model is very limited and not designed to explain a face-to-face communication. And that's why most textbooks call this information transfer model. So that our first keyword is transmit. To some people, the answer of question, what communication is that simply the transmitting of information. Our next keyword is share. Some people think communication is about sharing meaning. Fast forward several decades and a couple of models in 1962, Dean Berland articulated the transactional model of communication. To Berland, communication wasn't one-way process. To him, it had a different nature. Communication was dynamic, continuous, and circular. In other words, communication between people is ongoing, back and forth, simultaneous exchange. And we are senders and receiver at the same time. And the point is we exchange message because we want to share meaning with the other people. Berland's model includes both several verbal and non-verbal cues and feedback. And importantly to Berland, meaning exists within the person, not words. So like Shannon and Weaver's model 1948, the sender has a meaning that she or she wanted to communicate and encodes it in specific words and send it. At that point, Shannon and Weaver model meaning existed in the words, according to Berland, that wasn't quite right. That really highlights that meaning is not in the words, but meaning is in us. It's in our mind. We supply the meaning. We are improving our understanding, our interpretation on the process. And that's why two people can hear the same exact message but interpret it differently. So to Berland, he looks so closely on the way communication happens face to face. And he looked at the same of this subtitled process that were happening to explain this process more thoroughly. So while Shannon and Weaver's model is about transmitting message, the transactional model describes the complex and layered process we follow to pursue and achieve shared meaning with each other. To Berland, it's all about the way individuals collaboratively work toward shared meaning through communication. So Berland answered the question about what is communication is the process through which we are achieve shared meaning. Our next keyword is create. So let's leap forward a couple of more decades and talk about how communication is the generative process that creates our social world. And to me, gets really interesting. According to this approach, the word communication describes the way we create meaning in the first place. Robert Craig says communication constitutes our social reality. Constitute means create. He said in his 1999 article, communication is not a secondary phenomenon. Communication doesn't happen after those views are already in our head, after culture taught us norms, and after socioeconomic factors shape us. Craig says that communication is the primary constitutive social process that explains all these other factors. So I'll put that in my own words compared to the previous models. Phrase system meaning is not in the words. Meaning is not even in our words that we didn't communicate. We're not simply sharing already existing ideas. When we communicate with each other, according to these views in our conversations, we are generating those ideas together. We create meaning through our interactions with others over time. We create our social world together that we could not have not created on our own. The creation of shared meaning is a collective accomplishment. Our whole social reality is the product, the outcome of communication. So communication is that driving, creative force at the center of our sense of self, our relationships, our family, our culture, through interactions we make or break agreements, we create or dissolve relationships. We form the tone of nature of those relationships. We establish societal norms or violate them through the process of communication. So might it seem on the surface that meaning exists in words or even in our heads, but to Robert Krieg and the others who follow the constitutive approach, we have to remember that we are not dealing with already existing meaning to provide by nature. That meaning wasn't first and foremost generated and is still being generated through our communication process. So the answer to that question, what is communication, from this point of view, is that it's creative process, a meaning generating process. Guys, we've already covered a lot of grounds by looking at these three models. But let's finally touch the major areas that show how people look at communication that will help us make it even more concrete. The most historic area is rhetoric. If you're even taking a public speaking class, then you have the idea of what it is. It all began when Aristotle wrote a book about 2,000 years ago and even really before that, and he taught us that when we spoke, we had these available approaches and choices and techniques that we could use to persuade our listeners. The classic view of rhetoric is all about the speaker can create and shared message artfully with an audience for a maximum persuasiveness. Aristotle showed us that there are dozens or maybe even hundreds of small choices that we make along the way that can make us more or less persuasive given circumstances. Today, the area of rhetoric studies things like political speeches, argumentation, the freedom of expression in society, and lots of other topics like that. Another popular area is called interpersonal communication. This area looks at one-on-one conversations and relationships and normally focus on face-to-face interaction like friendships, romantic relationship, and family dynamics. At a basic level, you might study things like active listening skills, conflict resolutions, the stages of relationship. The area of interpersonal communication is a big area of study that looks at both nonverbal and verbal dynamics and how small changes in the way we talk to each other can shape our relationship in big ways. Another popular area is organizational communication, and this is another broad area. Here you'd learn about communication that happens in and around the workplace. You might study, for example, different leadership styles and how you see those at work or workplace culture and how it shapes our life as employees and how the communication is likely to happen through both formal and informal networks. Organization communication is a huge area and we even see subfields within it taking shape on their own, like crisis communication, training and development, and the whole classes in professional communication skills. More recently, we see a lot of internet in the area of health communication. And here you'd learn about how communication in healthcare settings is really important because it can directly impact issues like how quickly patients recover, how we communicate at risk, and how patients and family talk about illness in either harmful or helpful ways. It's all about the way that quality of communication influence our health and well-being. And I'm not just scratching the surface of communication is a huge field. And there's a lot of other interesting areas to study, and it seems like the boundaries continue to expand every day. And like I said from the beginning, finding one agreed upon definition of communication is not really the goal, but we have to at least explore basic definition, look at these three common models, and mention some major areas of study to help us answer the question. Hopefully, this will paint a well-rounded picture that answers the question about communication. Thank you for watching, guys!